I was very interested in your lecture when you were distinguishing the varieties of determinism. In particular, the theory of compatibilism, you call it. When I was in school, we called it soft determinism, because it was an attempt to say, yes, we're all determined, but we also have free will, as opposed to the hard determinists who say we're determined, and that means we don't have any free will. My understanding of this compatibilist or soft determinist view is that they try to say that yes, there are causes that necessitate every one of our choices, thoughts, actions, feelings, etc. But so long as our actions are determined by factors internal to ourselves, determined by our thoughts, determined by our reflections or experience or whatever, then it's not like being pushed around by gravity or by a guy with a gun at your head. That's as much freedom as we could ever expect.
And it's really a nice attempt to keep the determinist commitment while accounting for what it's like to be a human being, what it feels like to be a human being, and to say, well, yes, you do feel like you make choices. You do have moral thoughts. Yes, that's true of what you're like, but that's how you're determined, and that's how these things work out. So what feel to you like choices and significant values and actions that you determine are actually the way determinism is working out in you. And to me, I don't know, this is like having your cake and eating it too. It's a little bit like agnosticism, which wants to say, well, there might be a God, but I don't have any argument for it. In this case, yes, I want to be able to recognize everything that it is experientially part of being a human being, but I want to keep commitments to a metaphysical view, determinism, that I feel like I just have to accept for what are more or less religious reasons, that science tells me that this is the scientific way to talk, and so I'm going to ignore the facts about human beings that make it plainly false.
But it's interesting that because by that very same reasoning, all of the internal factors that our thoughts and feelings and preferences and so forth that compatibilists say are the source of our actions and make them free, all of those internal factors in themselves have causes by the thesis of determinism, and ultimately those causes go back and back to our environment, to our genes, to our heredity, and back before we were born in one unbroken causal chain. So it does seem to me, as it has to a lot of philosophers, that it doesn't really work in terms of explaining how we have any kind of genuine control over our actions, our thoughts, our lives.
Well, sure. In my lecture, I talk about the examples of how it is when you're focusing your mind, how it is you're exerting your willpower, all the things you do that show that you're in control of yourself, and this account really doesn't do much for that. In that sense, one of the things I found about talking about free will and determinism is that it is often a useless conversation, because I find myself in debates with determinists where I care about the determinist issue because I'm worried about someone doing, say, bad philosophy of mind or bad psychology, where they, like behaviorist psychology, for instance, where they treat the human being as an automaton. And I'm worried that people will wipe out morality, that they'll say that morality is meaningless, or that morality, the sense of responsibility, won't really be meaningful to people in the context of determinism. But then I'm arguing with a happy compatibilist who isn't willing to deny anything about the experience of being human, and is very happy to accept that morality is important, but then wants to try and convince me of determinism, but a determinism then that I really am unclear what the cash value is, what the import of that claim is for understanding human beings and understanding the world we live in.
Well, this is this is an issue that's been debated for 2,000 years, and virtually every theory on the free will side or the determinist side was conceived by Greek philosophers, if not earlier, and the debate's just been going on. So, and, it does get a little tiresome. You reach a resolution in your own mind, and after a certain point, the theoretical debate gets old, so to speak. But on the other hand, in addition to what you're saying, I think there's a real cultural resonance to this and personal resonance in that if you really believe in determinism, even the compatibilist version, you have a ready-made way of making excuses for whatever you do.
Oh, sure. It's an instant excuse machine.
Right.
Officer Krupke, I'm very upset.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. I'm depraved on account of I'm deprived. That great line from West Side Story. But think about the criminal justice and all the times when a certain body of theorists have been arguing, well, criminals act that way because they are deprived or for whatever other reason, and they're not truly responsible. So, that gets picked up. I've read enough about, interviews with criminals and studies of by criminologists. It gets picked up by the criminals themselves. All right, as in West Side Story. So, theoretically,
there's also actually a flip side to that, which is the spread of the metaphor of disease to all sorts of social activities.
Yeah, right.
So now overeating is a disease, they say. Don't we have any agency in our own lives? Well, no, this is the determinist worldview being played out, where even the way that you would think we would criticize people morally for how they're living. Instead, we say, oh, they're not really responsible. The people that are to blame are the companies that sell them things that they choose to buy.
Right. Right. Or they just have a shopping addiction, or in other realms, a sexual addiction, or a food addiction, or God, when you think of all the alleged addictions, that's it. That's exactly right. Yeah, that's interesting.
I have a bran flakes addiction.
Yeah.
I've become strangely addicted to eating cereal that tastes like cardboard.
Yeah. I'm addicted to driving fast. I love it, and it just happens. What can I say? Officer.
Right. I've got to try that out sometime.
Yeah.